What up, watch peeps? Every once in a while you come across a watch that just speaks to you. And it's even better when it happens unexpectedly. That is exactly what happened to me with the Van Banner. I knew it had a really unique case shape that appealed to me, but it's all the other things together that make this watch really talk to my soul. Alright, let's take a look. I'm Pete and we are Chillin' with Watches. Wrist check. Wearing the JB200 today. This watch, it's so ridiculous and so fun. Just really cool. I'm having a really good time wearing this watch. But we're here today to look at this FKM 2.0. I really like this box. It's just kind of a simple box, nothing over the top, but it's all really well put together and really great presentation. And just look at that dial. This thing is awesome. You know, I look at that dial and the best word I have for it is that it is just electric, and it's really hard to capture on camera the way the blue changes. It often looks like it's made of like blue glass or something like that. This watch was a wonderful surprise for me. I knew the colorful bezel would be cool. I knew the case shape would appeal to me and its originality, but I did not know how great all the other things would be. And like the dial, the bracelet, it just all adds up to a really fun package for me. So size-wise, we're looking at, it's a 40 millimeter case. It presents as larger than that, wears probably slightly larger than that as well. 41 at the bezel. So colors, you have this awesome blue dial I have here. There's also a white that looks like it's kind of textured, and there is a green dial as well. Now these are $300 about US. You have to convert from Canadian, but you can use my coupon code chillinwitwatches. It's WIT, and there's no spaces or anything in there. That will get you 10% off. I'll put all that in the description. Do it. So this case, Jefe said it's very Vostok, and you know what? He's right. It kind of reminds me of a 710 case in this top-down profile, and perhaps that's what resonates with me. But even from the side, I just love it. Everything is really straight cut and edgy. I love how this mid case sits real low, real close to the wrist. There's pretty much no case back there. And then how some of the thickness is then absorbed into the bezel here. You'll see that's very Doxa, which again, something I am also a fan of. And I really like this coarse vertical brushing. And you'll see the case sides take this nice little turn here. Like it turns in here, but then at the end it takes another turn at the end, which allows for it to have this kind of cool chunky slab without being too massive. It has a slightly offset crown here at not 4 o'clock, but it's at 3:30, so just slightly off center of 3 o'clock. And what a crown it is. Again, with the color, it has this killer red inlay with the PM for Parking Master, which is hilarious, right? Acknowledging the fact that, you know, timing your parking meter as such is much more likely how we actually use our watches. It's a nice gentle reminder not to take watches too seriously. It has a display case back, and your initial response is probably, why would you have a display case back and then cover it up with all those graphics? That's dumb. You know, I admittedly thought that at first too, but I have grown to love it. I love the color, I love the big red circle, and love their logo graphic. It's actually, you know, way more fun to look at than the Miyota movement is that's underneath it. You know, you've seen one Miyota, you've seen them all, and my thinking is this is still just way cooler than a solid case back with no color at all. So let's take a look at this dial. This blue is absolutely magic. I don't usually like sunburst dials, but this is so dynamic and vibrant, and combined with this single domed sapphire crystal, it just really comes to life. You get all sorts of crazy distortion and such. I'm a big fan of these chunky squared off hour markers that they're using. Tons of lume, which will be an absolute treat to look at in just a little bit. The hand selection perfectly complements these indices, and the red seconds hand I think ties in beautifully with the case back and, you know, the red on the crown and the red in the bezel. The bezel action, let me see if you can hear that. It's very clicky and precise. It just has a great tactile feel, just the right amount of resistance. There's For all intents and purposes, no play in this bezel whatsoever. Maybe the slightest hair of a bounce back after a click, but for all intents and purposes, it is non-existent. It has a really nice ceramic bezel insert. I love this. Is a great font selection for this watch, kind of squared off numbers, which I think goes great with the squared off indices and the kind of right angles used on the case. And it not only has colors in the bezel insert, they're inlaid there for the last 10 and 5 minutes before your parking meter runs out, but it is inlaid with colored lume. So this thing is an absolute treat in the dark. We'll get to that real soon. Just wait till you see it. At first glance, I wasn't real sure about how these end links transition from the case into the bracelet. It just didn't look very smooth to me, but on further reflection, they actually do this quite nicely. You'll see the first part of the end link, kind of where it sits flush with the end of the case to here. It sits flush both that way and vertically on the top, but then it has this kind of the male end link piece that extends a little further. You'll see is cut at a 45. Now that may look a little awkward when it's sitting flat or when it's hanging flat, but when it's on the wrist, that is like almost precisely the angle the bracelet will sit at, and all those planes kind of line up, and it actually makes for a really nice transition. There's two other things that make this bracelet great. It has flare and taper. It flares out from its 20 millimeter end length to 24 millimeters, then tapers all the way back down to 18. It's just pure magic. Flat end lengths that dance in the light as this thing kind of drapes and articulates. The links are short, which makes for easy sizing, and they use screw pins. They are double screwed from both sides, so you kind of have to be a little ambidextrous and do a little bit of a dance, but if you're used to holding one screwdriver in your left hand and the bracelet while turning the other side, it's not terrible. It's the same thing I think I came across with a couple different Zinn watches. So as far as the clasp goes, you got your standard 2 push button release with the safety fold over clasp. It's milled out, has a whole bunch of micro adjusts, so sizing this thing was cake. You definitely be able to get it really dialed in. So this thing is running a Miyota 9015. So lastly, let's throw it on the Timegrapher and see how it's running. So it looks to be settling in somewhere around +6 to +8 seconds per day. I think that is really good. Definitely well within the limits for a Miyota 9015. Amplitude shown at 250. Again, I think that's pretty consistent for Japanese movements. Maybe a little low, but I only just hand wound it. I was not wearing it this time. Beat error of 0.3. That's nothing I'm concerned about. All in all, I think this thing is running great. Going over the dimensions, we are looking at a 40 millimeter case, and it is 41 millimeters at the bezel. The lug to lug comes in at 47.8 millimeters, and it is 14 millimeters thick. That is including this single domed sapphire crystal. And again, it has 20 millimeter lug width. Going over some of the other specs, like I just said, we're looking at a gorgeous single dome sapphire crystal with all sorts of distortion in it. It uses a combination of C3 and BGW9, which is awesome. And I mentioned earlier Miyota 9015. This is actually running the Miyota 9039, which is a true no date movement, no phantom date position in this bad boy. And it features 200 meters of water resistance. On the OEM bracelet size for my 7 1/4 inch wrist, it came in at 160 grams. Now let's see how it wears on wrist. And here it is on my 7 1/4 inch wrist. And as I mentioned, I think it wears larger than a 40, but it doesn't wear too large by any means. I think you can see it fits me really well. Even with these kind of flat, chunky lugs, it just really sits close to the wrist. It's a very comfortable wear. I don't think there's any kind of overhang or anything like that. They still managed to keep the lug to lug quite tidy for what this watch is. And here you can see what I was talking about, how that I don't normally like male end links, but I think it works here the way it kind of maintains those two planes. It just looks really good, I think. And same thing on the other side. Works out really well. Much better in person than I thought it was going to be. Let's take a look at side by side some other watches. First up, here it is next to another 40mm diver, so you can see how it wears larger. This is an Invicta Pro diver that I have modded, but this is a 40mm case, and so is this. And you can see here that the Van Banner just wears a little larger, and I think a lot of that has to do with those chunky lugs. Next up, we'll take a look at it next to, I mentioned that El Jefe said it looks a little bit like a Vostok. I think, if anything, it looks maybe like this 710 case with those kind of turtle-shaped lugs. I think that's a pretty good comparison. Both of these cases, I think, are very comfortable, and I think they have a really cool, unique kind of shape to them. They managed to do it here with all sorts of curves and here with all sorts of right angles and edges, but both fantastic in their own right. If you want to look at next to something larger, here is a turtle at 44. Now, I do think the Van Banner wears smaller than a turtle, but probably wears more like an SKX in my opinion. Which, speaking of the SKX, I have one of those here as well. And I think this is probably a pretty fair comparison about how these two wear and how they feel on wrist to me as far as size goes. Both with those offset crowns. Even the thickness is pretty similar. All right, lastly, the thing I cannot wait to show you, the Lume on this thing, because it is amazing.
Keep the Lume.
So check this thing out. This thing is an absolute dream in the dark. So you got C3 on the hands and the 12 o'clock marker, and then you have BGW9 kind of everywhere else. And look at the Lume in between on the last like 10 and 5 minute spots on the bezel insert. You have this colored Lume in orange and red. Just so much fun. And this thing, it's in person. This is really bright for, I know BGW9 is not always bright as C3, but they've managed it here with a nice thick application. This thing looks awesome. So there you go, the Van Banner Parking Master 2.0, one of the funnest watches I've ever had in. And I know this review probably sounded like I was gushing, but I promise you it was all genuine. I just really love this watch. It's one of those watches that I just can't stop staring down at my wrist when I have this one on. All right, before I let you go, sneaker check. Wearing my Jordan 3s, and that is it. I'm out. If it's not too much trouble, please like, subscribe, and come back next time. Peace.